Welcome back. This afternoon, MPs opposed to leaving the EU without a deal will gather at Church House, which acted as a temporary location for Parliament during the Second World War.
Well, the event's been organised because the Prime Minister has refused to rule out temporarily shutting down Parliament to prevent MPs from blocking a no deal. Joining us to ponder this one and the potential for the prorogation of Parliament in particular is Bronwen Maddox, Director of the Institute for Government. Bronwen Maddox, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
We were just talking to Jo Swinson, actually, about whether she would agree, and it actually seemed that she did, with the idea floated by The Guardian today, the Shadow Attorney General, Shami Chakrabarti, saying there could be legal measures taken to stop Parliament being prorogued.
That's right. I mean, that's one arm of consideration, if you like. But there are also other moves which have been going on this afternoon about whether MPs can themselves not just do that to block what the government might do, but actually next week when Parliament gets back on, to try to seize control of the business of the House of Commons and force the government to act for an extension. And an awful lot of the discussion that's going on in this week before Parliament gets back is about that.
But Lordy, what a headline that would be if it was judges thwarting Brexit. You could see how it could be spun.
You could see how it could be spun like that, but you know, in a standoff between Parliament and the executive, as it's formally called, between the government, you can see why people are reaching for others that might break this deadlock, whether it's the Queen, who sometimes gets invoked as a possible person to pronounce judgment on this, or indeed on the courts.
Meanwhile, of course, there is still a...
because there are not many parts of this that actually come down to law. It mainly comes down to convention, and they have said very clearly, look, it's not for us to pronounce on convention.
But there are obviously political judgments as well, aren't there? And one will be that while you've still got a negotiating process still extant, Boris Johnson in Berlin, Angela Merkel says, OK, you've got 30 days to look at the backstop. Backbenchers will scratch their heads and think, OK, there is still a possibility, at least, no matter how faint or otherwise, that a deal can be voted on and secured.
I think that's right. I mean, I don't know if she was aware of the political gift she was giving him in saying that 30 days, or whether indeed she intended to put pressure on him. But it was a political gift because it kicked this period in which he might reasonably say, look, we're really trying very hard to get a deal, kicked it very conveniently beyond the period in which Parliament returns and then rises 2 weeks later to get ready for the party conferences. And so many MPs will be thinking maybe the government could still get a deal and we'd like to give it that chance. And it certainly was one of the reasons why the move to get a vote of no confidence as soon as Parliament got back next week, why that has lost some of the momentum it seemed to have a couple of weeks ago when Jeremy Corbyn was pushing very hard for it.
So people still pondering with other measures, Standing Order 24, emergency motion. What avenues exist?
Well, one of them is to call for an emergency debate under Standing Order 24, and that's to bring a debate on, say, next Tuesday. And it would need the Speaker's permission, John Bercow's permission, to give that more teeth than it would normally have. Normally it would just say that Parliament had considered something. But to give it teeth to then get control of business, which might mean that the very next day, that if MPs had got control of the business of the House of Commons, they could then put together a motion saying we ask the government to go and we insist that the government goes and asks the EU for an extension. But then there have to be all kinds of wrinkles on that. Can they actually force the government to accept an extension, even if it got one? That's one question. And what kind of extension? For how long? And biggest question, what would they do with an extension if they actually managed to get through all that? And that their opinions are not united, to say the very least, on those things.
Bronwen, just a thought about the front-page story on, I think, your old paper, The Times, today. Criticism for Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury, from people like Ian Duncan Smith, who are essentially saying he's simply, as the leader of the established church, which enjoys the statutory rights that it does, simply too partial now, simply too pro-Remain.
Well, the Brexit camp doesn't want anything that looks like the church coming in on the side of, say, opposing...
Polls do suggest that Anglicans voted two-thirds of them voted to leave.
Yes, I mean, I think the Archbishop, I mean, he's no stranger to this. He's been very willing from the beginning of his tenure to wade into things and say, I think I quote him rightly, look, Jesus wasn't party political, but he was very political, and there follows a long list of things the Archbishop would like to pronounce on. I think he has been fairly careful about not wading in on one side or the other, but he is trying to get together citizens' assemblies as a way of trying to get a different kind of discussion about what people really want about this. And it's interesting. There is you know, some sort of low-level interest across the place about trying to get that kind of debate to see what people might want 3 years on. But you really need some time to do this very carefully. It's almost like this kind of science of polling brought to the community level.
Bronwen Maddox, good to talk to you. Thanks a lot.